Yeah, I pressed record. Okay, thank you everyone for joining. So those of you who are here, I hope that you have a source sheet that you took from the back. And also those who are by Zoom, we posted the source sheets, the PDF of the source sheets on the chat box. So this way it's a little bit hard on the, to share the screen back and forth, but this way you have the source sheets in the chat box. So just click on that and you'll be able to access the source sheets.
Rabbi, I don't see them in the chat. Are you sure they're there?
Not on the chat.
They are on the chat.
Good evening. Welcome to all those who are here in person and also all those joining by Zoom. Thank you so much for joining. The last month has been very, very difficult for our Kehillah with the loss of many Beth Jacob members who made our shul the special community that it is. And we mourn the passing this past month of members, Fela Chappelle, Mark Rubin, Irv Berger, Celia Isakovitz, Edie Aronoff, Marjorie Green, Herman Chaim Schoen, Myrtle Sidowitz, and Zalman Harari. These individuals, each in their own way, were remarkable people, deeply loved and admired by their family and friends, and were members and pillars of Beth Jacob. And so I'd like to dedicate this Shabbat Hagadol Drasha, this first hybrid Shabbat Hagadol Drasha for those here in Chappelle and all those joining by Zoom. So nice to see everyone, and I'm so appreciative that you've joined. I'd like to dedicate this Shabbat Hagadol Drasha to their memory, knowing that their families and our extended Beth Jacob family will always be inspired by their legacy. We are really charged to emulate their ideals and take the shul that they built and give of ourselves to grow it and make it even stronger. Yehi Zichram Baruch. May their memory always be for a blessing. A short documentary called Wendy's Shabbat was screened in film festivals around the country in 2018. The film relates the heartwarming story of a group of elderly retired Jews in Palm Desert holding Shabbat dinners at Wendy's restaurant. You see that as a picture on the first source of the source sheets that were posted in the chat box. And despite the unusual non-kosher setting, these men and women are described as, quote, finding the connection to Judaism and community in whatever way they can. I believe this story is remarkable evidence of the desire to connect with Jews and with our tradition, no matter what the obstacles. Every single Jew, even though distant from the Masorah, even if not keeping kosher, has that pintel yid, that spark of a Jew that moves them to pursue holiness and connection. But while heartwarming and inspiring, it's a little bit sad, isn't it? To see individuals, Jews, eating out at a non-kosher restaurant, and that being their Shabbat experience. As the author, Dr. Yvette Miller, wrote in 2018 in commenting on the documentary, quote, in a country as rich in Jewish resources as ours, is this really the best we could do for our bubbies and zaydis? Does the existence of Wendy's Shabbats mean that we're not doing all we can to include the most vulnerable Jews in our Shabbat and other celebrations? Can we provide these yearning souls with a deeper, more authentic Shabbat experience? Moving from Wendy's in Palm Desert 2018 to Montgomery, Alabama in the 1950s, Charles Duhigg, in his book, The Power of Habit, writes about Rosa Parks and the civil rights movement. Rosa Parks was not the first Black passenger jailed for breaking Montgomery's bus segregation laws. Many others were arrested in prior years, either for talking back to the bus drivers or sitting in the white section and refusing to move. And you see here in the source from Charles Duhigg, in 1946, Geneva Johnson had been arrested for talking back to a Montgomery bus driver. In 1949, Viola White, Katie Winfield, and two Black children were arrested for sitting in the white section and refusing to move. But none of those arrests resulted in boycotts or protests, however. There weren't many real activists in Montgomery at the time. Taylor Branch, the Pulitzer Prize winning civil rights historian, told Duhigg. People didn't mount protests or marches. Activism was something that happened in the courts. It wasn't something that average people did. But when a young Martin Luther King Jr. arrived in Montgomery in 1954, about a year before Parks' arrest, he found the majority of the city's blacks accepted segregation without apparent protest. Not only did they seem resigned to segregation, they also accepted the abuses, seemingly, and indignities that came with it. And the question that we have to explore, and we're going to get to later, is, so why, when Parks was arrested, did things change? So with these introductory questions out there, let's talk about the upcoming holiday, because Pesach is coming up, in case you didn't realize. And Rabbi Gamliel teaches us that there's three central components of the Seder, which should dominate our evening conversation: Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. And you see this in source number 3, where in the Haggadah we say, Pesach, Shahayu Avotenu Ochlem Bizman Shebeit HaMikdash Shayakayim, Al Shema, Al Shum Shepasach HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Al Batei Avotenu B'Mitzrayim. That our ancestors would eat the carbon Pesach while the temple stood. And what does it recall? Al Shema. It recalls Hashem passing over, Pesach, the Jewish homes in Egypt, on that dramatic night. For the first Pesach, the Jews, long oppressed, were instructed to take a lamb on the 10th, shecht it on the 14th of Nisan, and splash the blood on the doorposts. Through this action, the Jews were rewarded with Hashem's protection when he passed over their homes during the plague of the firstborn. And in all future years, and certainly in the Beit HaMikdash, the ceremony was formalized that we would slaughter a lamb in the afternoon. Limbs and fats were placed on the altar, and the majority of the meat of the animal was taken by the offering's owner, was grilled, and was eaten that night in Yerushalayim. Nowadays, and until the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash, we place the zroa, right, the shank bone, on the Seder plate. And we're careful at the Seder to not even point when we say Pesach al Shema, because we don't want the gesture to be misinterpreted that this is the sacrifice. But the fact that it is on the Seder plate reminds us that the Paschal Lamb, that the carbon Pesach, is an essential, central part of the holiday of Pesach that we're all anticipating, that we're all getting excited about, that we're all preparing for. And so if we want to achieve a maximal Seder experience, Rabbi Gamliel teaches us, we must understand and speak about the carbon Pesach. And there's one law, there's one requirement that's unique to carbon Pesach that does not apply to any other offerings. It is the requirement of participating in a chabura, in a group. A little bit like now that we have a group by Zoom and we have a group here in Chappelle Sanctuary and we're all feeling connected. You had to participate in a group when it came to the carbon Pesach. And one sage in the Mishnah, and you have it in your sources, on source number 4, one source in the Mishnah teaches us that Ein Shochtin es Pesach ala Yachid. There's one opinion, Rabbi Yehuda, who says we do not slaughter the Pesach offering for a single individual. Okay, Rabbi Yossi disagrees, but you see here something really astonishing, because aside from Kaddish and different parts of the Tefillah, where some parts require a minyan and a group, it's very rare to find a mitzvah that cannot be fulfilled solo. Mitzvah like Sukkah, Lulav, Shofar, and Shabbat are enhanced, no doubt, when they're fulfilled and enjoyed with family and friends. But your Yotzei, the mitzvah is fulfilled even on your own. And so it's therefore remarkable for Rabbi Yehuda to declare that the Karban Pesach is different and that it should never be offered and it can't be fulfilled by a person on his or her own. While the position of Rabbi Yehuda is a matter of debate, so all the sages are in agreement that the Pesach is offered only for those who are pre-registered for it. It's a little bit like the Tefillah services this past year, as annoying as this has been. And you weren't just allowed to show up at the Seder. It doesn't mention anything about temperature checks, but the Pesach needed RSVPs. It needed registration through a process called minui. Minui is when a person verbally communicates that he or she wants to register with the Korban Pesach, and by mutual consent, the person is then included in the Chabura, is included in the group. The Torah teaches us this in Parshat Bo, in source number 5. It says, "V'lakachu shcheno akarov el beito," that you and your neighbor, b'michsat nefashot, according to the number of people, ish lefi achlo, according to the proportion of what you're able to eat, tachosu al haseh, that's the way you shall be counted for the lamb of the Paschal offering. And the Talmud in Pesachim, Samach Aleph Amid Aleph, and I see there's some chats coming in. So Aryeh or Benjamin, if you want, you could also take a look at the chat and let me know if there's anything significant. I'm sure anything that someone is chatting is significant. And I'm also just taking a moment to look at who's on and see all your smiling faces and see your names. Thank you so much for joining. And okay. So the Gemara in Pesachim, says b'michsat nefashot. Take a look at source number 6 on the left hand side, and I'm just a drop concerned because it says 100 participants, and so Benjamin, if you're on, and I think you are, just make sure that it should be set to a higher max, to the max of 500. Just if anyone there, we go 101. Okay, 101. That's the magic number. Okay, just wanted to make sure that nobody was being kept out. So let's see if I could focus on the Chappelle Sanctuary, on Zoom, on everything going on, and chat boxes and max requirements, and also stay focused on the Shir. So Pesach, there's an opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that you could only fulfill it with somebody else. And everyone agrees, and Benjamin, if you could post the source sheet again. And everyone agrees that you only fulfill the mitzvah when you're registered. You needed to RSVP to participate in the group. And the Talmud in Pesachim 61a, source number 6, teaches us this in the underlines. It teaches, right-hand column, it teaches that the Pesach may be slaughtered only for those registered on it. Yachal, shachato, shalol menuyav. It might be thought that if you slaughtered it for those not registered, yehei over ala mitzvah v'kasher. You might think, okay, if you didn't register for the Pesach, so the Paschal lamb could still be kasher, and the person b'di'evid after the fact can still participate in the offering. No, Talmud lomar b'michsat tachosu. The Torah repeats it. First it says b'michsat nefashot, according to the number of people. And then it says, Tachosu al haseh. Onkelos understands that to mean that you have to be counted, you have to be registered. And so Hakatuv, Shina alav la'akev, the verse repeats the requirement to make it essential. It's indispensable. And the Gemara presents interesting discussions about what happens if a person doesn't follow the etiquette of the group or eats excessively. Under what conditions can the group expel an individual from the Chabura? But you need to be a participant in the group. And the Gemara also teaches us that, and you don't have it on your source sheet, but that the registration needed to be done prior to the slaughtering. There was no extension of the deadline. This was not like the shul email from a shloch manot, right? Where you know you're going to get multiple emails and we're going to wear you down and we're going to besiege you until you get signed up. And so you might as well just sign up the first time we send out the email from a shloch manot. So this is different than the shul emails. The Pesach had a strict deadline by the Shechita, and after that, you weren't able to be counted. And the Rambam talks about this in source number 7. You're supposed to stick with your group, and you can't move in the course of the eating to another group. And then the Rambam says on the left side, he says everyone should be enumerated on the lamb. Those enumerated on Paschal sacrifice are referred to as the members of the company, as the B'nei HaChabura. And the question we have to ask, aside from Wendy's Shabbat and Rosa Parks, the question we have to ask is about Korban Pesach. And this is a central part of the experience at the Seder, Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, Rabbi Gamliel says, is why is the notion of Chabura, of a group, so essential to the Paschal sacrifice? Why is this sacrifice different from all other sacrifices? Another unique feature for the Pesach is that if you missed the first carbon Pesach, so you had a second chance in certain situations to bring it. And so while there's a strict deadline for registering, if you missed the carbon altogether because you were tameh or b'derech rechoka, you were defiled, or you were very, very distant from Yerushalayim, you would be given another opportunity. So it turns out that the carbon Pesach is a little bit like the Shul Mishloach Manot email, after all. And the second opportunity is called Pesach Sheni, which a person can bring a month later. And it's a fascinating concept, which is not found, I believe, by any other mitzvot. If you miss shofar on Rosh Hashanah, you miss the lulav on Sukkot, you don't fast on Yom Kippur, you don't do the rabbinical mitzvot of reading the Megillah or lighting the menorah. We don't say that you could get another chance a week later or a month later at your convenience. No way. Forget about it. So Pesach is different. And the origin of that is Sefer Bamidbar. You have it in source number 8. When men in the wilderness came forward to Moshe, they were protesting that they missed the Pesach because of a ritual defilement. That was no fault of their own. And Hashem issues a ruling that no worries, these men could do it in a month, in a new law that is laid down for all generations. They're able to do the carbon Pesach a month later. And so what is the distinguishing feature of Pesach, my friends, which serves as the basis for this Pesach Sheni, that this mitzvah is different than all of the mitzvot, that you need a group. And number two, that if you miss it the first time, you're able to have a second chance and bring it a month later in certain situations. And so to understand why the Pesach needed a chabura and why there's a Pesach Sheni, we need to explain the symbolism of the carbon Pesach. And hopefully this is going to give us a whole new appreciation of not just the carbon Pesach, but also of the holiday. Because the first Paschal lamb in Egypt was really the time for the Jewish people to make a choice. They had to choose and decide where they wanted to throw their lot and destiny. Ancient Near Eastern texts confirm that the lamb was worshipped by the Egyptians as one of their gods. The Jewish people at that crucial moment needed to demonstrate their rejection of this idolatrous belief by taking the Egyptian idol, by shechting it, and by offering it to the true God, to the God of Israel, to the God of the world, right, to Hashem. And this act conveyed their belief in an invisible God who created man and woman in his image and gave man the right to be free. Splashing the blood on the doorposts was a statement of defiance of the idolatry. It was a statement of belief in the true God. And when Hashem commanded the Jews to do carbon Pesach, this was incredibly difficult, considering the culture that they were embedded in, considering the fear that they had of their taskmasters. This was something that required a certain sense of courage to be able to be defiant at that moment. And so the carbon Pesach was a moment of truth. Will they slaughter their lamb and throw their lot with God, or will they not have the courage to do it? And they were asked to make a pledge to God, certainly, but they also needed to demonstrate an additional commitment. And this additional commitment was to make it to the Jewish people. Slaughtering the lamb was not just, are they going to throw their lot with Hashem above, but would they also throw their lot with Jewish national destiny around the world, past, present, and future? And so what was the central requirement of that evening, which demonstrated that they were coming together as a nation? Which law highlighted that they were going to throw their lot and their destiny with the Jewish people? The commentaries explain that this was the purpose of the Chabura, of the group. Rabbi Yehuda declares that the Pesach was not legitimate. It was not valid if it was done alone. And all the rabbis agree that you must register with a group to fulfill the mitzvah and consume the carbon with others for the experience to have legitimacy and significance in the eyes of Jewish thought and Jewish law. So the carbon Pesach marked the moment the Jewish people came together as a kehillah to form a nation. The Pesach was the symbol of their redemption. And this act of coming together was essential for the original redemption. And to commemorate this, for every Pesach going forward, you need to participate with a group, with other Jews, to experience the holiday properly. And the notion of chabura, of RSVPing, is the way we all make a statement that we all belong to Klal Yisrael. We all are part and parcel and connected to the Jewish people, wherever the Jewish people may be. Rav Soloveitchik says this beautifully in source number 9. He says in the book Festival of Freedom, in the essay Slavery and Freedom, he says, interestingly, the symbol of redemption in the Torah is the Korban Pesach. The concept of chavura, of community, is completely non-existent regarding other offerings. Pesach has been linked up by the Torah with chabura to such an extent that there's one sage with that opinion, right? Rabbi Yehuda, that you can only fulfill it with a group. And the Pesach differs from all other sacrifices because it is a symbol of cherut, of freedom. It's a lamb for every household with others, because freedom expresses itself in the realm of bayit, of community, of being together. And bayit is a new category, which was revealed to the Jews as they gained their freedom. Why is freedom expressed in being together? Why is it so important that Bnei Yisrael needed to come together on that first Pesach, and that throughout our history we have to come together on Pesach ba'achdut? Why is a shared experience so important for us to manifest and express that notion of freedom? Primo Levi survived Auschwitz. In his book, If This Is a Man, he describes his experiences there. And he says when the Nazis left in January 1945, because fearful of the Russian advances, so the prisoners who were able to walk were taken on the brutal death marches. And all the other prisoners who were not able, who were too ill, too weak to move, so they were left in the camp. And describing that situation, Primo Levi, source number 10, writes that when the broken window, and this excerpt is found in Rabbi Jonathan Sax's Haggadah, Primo Levi writes that when the broken window was repaired and the stove began to spread its heat, something seemed to relax in everyone. And at that moment, Torah Roski proposed to the others that each of them offer a slice of bread to us three who had been working. They had been working to try to light a fire and to bring warmth to the room. And only a day before, this would have been inconceivable, but it was agreed at that time that they would share their bread with those three who had been working. The law of the camp always said, eat your own bread, and if you can, that of your neighbor. To do otherwise would have been suicidal. The offer of sharing bread was the first human gesture that occurred among us. And I believe that that moment can be dated as the beginning of the change by which we, who had not died slowly, changed from haftlinga, from prisoners, to men again. Sharing our bread is the greatest display of true freedom. Freedom gives us the capacity to choose to give to others, to give from our blessings. And when we reach out to others to care about those in need and to share our food, that's when we're transformed from slaves into free people. That's when we become truly free and we bring freedom to others. The word for freedom is cherut. Cherut is associated with another word, achrayut, responsibility. Because in Jewish tradition, freedom doesn't mean that you can just do whatever you want, but it means that we now have an opportunity and a responsibility to maximize our time in this world. We have a responsibility. And what's the nature of our responsibility? Cherut is achrayut, and it's responsibility to the first 2 and 3 letters of that word, to ach and acher, to our brothers and members of our family, that's ach, and acher, to all others. Freedom expresses itself in the realm of community, in being together, in the Korban Pesach. And the holiday of Pesach brings us together b'chabura, in a shared experience, because that's the only way that we can express our freedom through cherut, achrayut, to ach and acher. And chabura is so essential that the Pesach, we now realize, is the true paradigmatic shared experience. David Brooks, New York Times, has an article that he wrote several years ago called The Prodigal Sons, where the famous parable of the prodigal son, where the father has 2 sons and the younger one takes his share of the inheritance and spends it, in a rowdy, unruly fashion. And then after blowing all the money, so then he returns home. And his father runs out and embraces him and says that we're going to declare a feast in his honor. And the older son, the responsible one, who had always chosen wisely how to spend his money, was appalled. All the years he had acted responsibly, and now this prodigal son who was away for so many years and comes back, and now he's getting such a grand reception. And the father responded, you were always with me, and everything I have is yours. But I have to celebrate the younger child's return. The boy was lost and is now found. Leaving aside the question of whether the father handled it in the best way, why does the father organize a feast? And David Brooks, in the article, source number 11, you are accepted. It requires mutual confession. They need to all come back together. Why does the father organize a feast? Fourth line. Because a feast is nominally about food, but in Jewish life, it is really about membership. It reasserts your embedded role in the community project. The father's lesson for all of us is that if you live in a society that is coming apart on class lines, the best remedies are oblique. They are projects that bring the elder and the younger brothers, that bring the different demographics, the young professionals and the not so young professionals, all the different parts of the community from all different backgrounds, origins, educational levels and backgrounds and levels of observance, right? That what brings it all together is a third goal: national service projects, infrastructure building, strengthening a company, or a congregation. The congregation, what we call a kehila, serves as a way for people to come back together in an environment that's warm, inclusive, and non-judgmental. Like Brooks describes the feast and the project and the congregation, that's Beth Jacob. That's the Beit Knesset. And specifically, it's davening together, it's learning together, but it's also the shared experience of a meal, of a kiddush, of a learning group as well, that reasserts that all the participants have a sense of belonging, that we're here to support one another, we're connected to each other, we identify with one another's needs, and we have a sense of belonging. You matter. You play a role in the community. And the Carbon Pesach Habura, and to a large extent the Pesach Seder that we celebrate every single year, is that paradigmatic shared experience. It's that meal that brings the group together and symbolizes our kehila in 2021 coming back together. Why are we allowed to bring a Pesach Sheni a month later? Normally, onus Rahmana Patre, right? The Torah excuses you, gives you a break, right? If it's extenuating circumstances, you're not able to do a mitzvah, so then you're exempt. Suddenly, for this one mitzvah, there's a makeup date 1 month later. And the secret is that with the Carbon Pesach and the holiday of Pesach, we declare our identification with the Jewish people. Carbon Pesach is more than just the mitzvah of the day. It's more than just the shank bone on the Seder plate. It's a reaffirmation of the communal covenant that we have with Hashem. It's a statement of belonging to the Jewish people. It's the fact that we're together, we care about one another, and we have a sense of responsibility to all the different demographics and individuals in the community. There's a fascinating story about a rabbi, Rabbi Loza ben Arach, who went to a resort town called Prugaita. And he and his wife go there, and there's fine wine, and it's a beautiful place. And he's really far away from the Jewish community. When he comes back to the yeshiva, several months or a couple of years later, he's called up for the Torah reading of Parshat Bo. Maybe it was Parshat Bo, maybe it was the first day of Pesach. And he reads the Torah. And instead of reading the pasuk, HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem, right, that this month is for you, the first of the months, he reads it, HaCheresh Haya Libam. So instead of HaChodesh, he wrote it HaCheresh. He switched the Daled with the Resh. Chodesh means month, Cheresh means the deaf person. And instead of Haya Lachem, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, he said Libam, your hearts, because the Chaf and the Bet are very, very similar. And he mixed up the letters. And so what's the significance? And I once learned that the mistake of Rabbi Elazar ben Arach was that in this resort town, he thought that he knew so much Torah that he could be separated from the community and that he could sustain himself alone. Having moved away from the Jewish community, he became deaf to the notion that we have to be together with others. We have to be interconnected and responsible for one another. It was his self-satisfied isolation that did him in. He thought he could sustain himself as an individual separate from the community. And the truth is that a Jew can never live on his own, and a Jewish family can never be isolated from other Jewish families or the world around us. So living all alone, his heart became deaf. His heart became deaf to the hearts and minds of the Jewish people living out there in the world. And ultimately, Rabbi Elazar absorbed the lesson, because in Pirkei Avot, when all the rabbis are asked, what's the quality that a person should have, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach is the one who answers that he should have a leiv tov, a good heart, as opposed to a deaf heart. He perhaps realized why Pesach requires a chabura, and we have Pesach Sheni, a second chance, because not participating in the Korban Pesach would leave you without any connection. And the worst thing that a Jew could have is if you're disconnected from the Jewish people, if you're disconnected from a shul. That's the worst thing that you could have. And that's why you have Pesach Sheni. Because if a person missed it and you can't do it at the proper time, so then we give you a second chance. So this way, every Jew has the opportunity to make that statement of offering the Korban Pesach and to say that I am a member of Klal Yisrael and I feel a sense of belonging. And so every Jew needs to have that opportunity. You were ritually defiled. It might have been by accident. Usually it's by accident, or you were at a distance. Okay, maybe you should have gotten it right the first time and planned better. But we want to make sure that every Jew has a chance to participate in Klal Yisrael. Albert Einstein, in a letter, source number 12, he writes that a human being is part of a whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical illusion or delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. And Judaism believes in concentric circles with different levels of commitment. It may end with all living creatures, but the commitment to transcend ourselves and stand with others starts with the Jewish community, with the Kihila. As another great philosopher of the modern era, Jim Valvano, coach and broadcaster, Jim Valvano said, quote, "A person does not become whole until he or she becomes part of something bigger than himself or herself." What are the benefits of a kihila? Why is it important to be part of something bigger? Why do we need to get together in a shared experience and be connected to Klal Yisrael as we approach Hashem? Why is it so meaningful when we daven together, learn together, and share Kiddush together? And why are we so yearning to get past this pandemic so we can return to these activities, so we can come back to Beth Jacob? You guys are all enjoying this year by Zoom, but you can't wait to get back to Beth Jacob. Why is it so important? Why are you yearning for this, whether consciously or subconsciously? And firstly, individual revelation posits that one person can fathom the whole truth. Collective revelation and communal experience provides both humility and checks and balances. Being part of a kehillah provides a measure of moderation for what could otherwise become dangerously unrestrained religious fervor. Think about Rav Shimon Bar Yochai and his son, Rabbi Eliezer, who in the cave for so many years, and when they came out, they started burning everything with their eyes because they had become disconnected from the community, so they didn't have those checks and balances, and the religious fervor got out of hand and wasn't able to be moderated and applied to the world around them. In Judaism, it has to work in the real world, in society, among other people. And at the end of the day, the golden rule for ethical behavior is not what would Moshe do or what would Aaron do, but rather, how would you like to be treated? And act accordingly in the way that we treat others. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. But beyond humility and checks and balances, community is the way we express freedom through the supreme foundational trait of what? Of chesed. Olam chesed yibana. That the world is created through chesed, through kindness. Olam chesed yibana. And Rav Soloveitchik in Festivals of Freedom, in another essay, in Exalted Evening, he says that a person could experience freedom in two ways. Tzaddik in pelts, right? Or not. Man has the choice to eat either in hiding alone, source number 13, like the beast in its lair, or in community before the Lord. When eating rises to a great service, to an experience of God found and held not by reason, but by feeling the discomfort and embarrassment of those who have not, and inviting them to join those who have. When you do that, then a new community is born, consisting of master, mistress, servant, pauper, young, old. The birth of community hallows the meal and endows it with sanctity. There's no division at the Pesach Seder, at the Shabbat meal, in a Beit Knesset, into host and guest, into master and servant, into giver and recipient, into a generous philanthropist, and embarrassed individual who is in need. The birth of the Chesed community, of a nation within which people unite, gives things away, in which we care about one another, in which we share what we possess. That's symbolized by the Korban Pesach, says Rav Soloveitchik. God did not need the Paschal Lamb, second paragraph, third line. He had no interest in the sacrifice. He simply wanted the people, slaves who had just come out, who had just come out of the house of bondage, to emerge from their isolation. He wanted the Jews to emerge from their isolation, to emerge from their insane self-centeredness into the chesed community, where the little that man has is too much for himself, where whatever he possesses transcends his ability to enjoy. A new fellowship was formed around the Paschal Lamb. A new community sprang into existence, being together, living with each other, sharing something many possess in common was made possible by the ceremonial Paschal Lamb. And what unites people partaking of the common meal? It's that sense of solidarity and sympathy, writes Rav Soloveitchik. And the sense of solidarity was forged in Egypt because not all the Jews in Egypt were slaves. The servitude was neither uniform nor homogeneous, but rather there were various degrees of slavery. Chazal tell us that the tribe of Levi was not enslaved. The Jewish aristocracy, the wealthy, those who paid high taxes, did not have to do physical labor, the rabbis teach us, which is very, very interesting. Still, there was a unity of purpose, solidarity and responsibility. The Kohanim and Leviim also have to celebrate Pesach, even though they didn't experience the servitude in the same fashion. There was unity of purpose, solidarity, and responsibility, and each one felt the pain of her neighbor and helped. That's what helped bring the redemption. I began with Wendy's Shabbat, which shows the determination of a group for holiness and connection. Right, Wendy's Shabbat, where they went to a non-kosher restaurant to have Shabbat dinners together. But Dr. Yvette Miller wondered, does the existence of Wendy's Shabbats mean that we're not doing all we can to include the most vulnerable Jews in our Shabbat and other celebrations? What can we do more? And it's a great question that leads us to a natural, logical conclusion that the Wendy's Shabbat is not just an inspiring model of what Jews do for a sense of connection, but reminds us of our responsibility to reach out to others and try to include everyone in the shul, at the Shabbat table, at the Yontif meal, literally and figuratively. This is a reminder to us of our duty to reach out to those who are feeling isolated, to those who are vulnerable, to include everyone, to help bring people. We have to work harder to help bring people into the community, and now to help bring people back into the community. As we say, the fourth child is She'enu Yodei Lisho. There's so many Jews out there today that don't even know what to ask and how to ask. They don't know the first thing about Pesach, about Shabbat, about Sfirat Omer, that all of you know so much about. And what the Haggadah says is that if it's an She'enu Yodei Lisho, what do? At petachlo. You do it with a softness, at, like with the feminine dimension, but you have to reach out. Man and women, we have to reach out At petachlo, we have a responsibility to reach out and try to bring them in. A lot of times we call the Jews who are disconnected, we say minimally affiliated, but that puts a responsibility on them. Really, it's a responsibility on us. And we should say they're minimally inspired because maybe I need to do more. Maybe you need to do more, whether virtually or in person, to bring Jews back to the table. At petachlo. That's Wendy's Shabbat. Reminds us of our responsibility, our achrayut. Charles Duhigg, in his Power of Habit, so he gives an explanation why Rosa Parks is known as the mother of the civil rights movement, as the first lady of freedom. Why Manishtana Rosa Parks, if I may say so. So in source number 14, in the Power of Habit, Charles Duhigg, he says, Rosa Parks, unlike other people, was deeply respected and embedded within her community. So when she was arrested, it triggered a series of social habits, the habits of friendship that ignited an initial protest. Parks' membership in dozens of social networks across Montgomery allowed her friends to muster a response before the community's normal apathy could take hold. Rosa Parks was one of those rare people of whom everyone agreed she gave more than what she received. Parks' many friendships and affiliations cut across the city's racial and economic lines. Secretary of the local NAACP, a chapter, attended the Methodist Church. She helped oversee youth organization, weekends volunteering at a shelter, botanical club, Wednesday night groups, knitting blankets, dressmaking services to poor families. She was so deeply enmeshed in the community, in fact, that her husband complained that she ate more often at potlucks than at home. In general, sociologists say most of us have friends that are like us. We may have a few close acquaintances who are richer, a few who are poor, a few of different races. But on the whole, our deepest relationships tend to be with people who look like us, earn the same amount of money, come from similar backgrounds. Parks' friends, in contrast, spanned Montgomery's social and economic hierarchies. She had what sociologists call strong ties, firsthand relationships with dozens of groups throughout Montgomery that didn't usually come in contact with one another. That was key. And because Rosa Parks transcended the social stratifications of the Black community in Montgomery as a whole, that's what made the difference. That's why with all these different networks and through all her friendships, that's why people sprung into action. And that's how the protests began. And so when Rosa Parks was arrested, it triggered a different response because she understood the power of chabura in her life. She had multiple chaburas. She had multiple circles of friends across different demographic lines. And it's that sense of solidarity through those friendships. That's what manifested itself in them responding to support her when she was arrested. Pesach symbolizes the birth for all of us of the Chesed community. It's the power of the chabura to bring people together. And we need to create chaburot, not just with the person who's next to you, but with the totality of the community. And people are usually limited by their perspectives and their experiences. Once their oldest child hits 13, then they start asking, okay, what's the shul doing for teens? And in case of a disability, right, if a person is connected in some way, has a friend or a family member who has a disability, all right, so we need to make the shul wheelchair accessible and be more inclusive of those with special needs and those with disabilities. And people should advocate for themselves. But when you're in a community, and what it means to be in Klal Yisrael, what it means is that you care for your neighbor's sick child as much as you care for your child if your child is sick. The definition of a great community is that you care about teens, even if you don't have a teen, you're not blessed with a child, or you're not blessed with a teen, where everyone's child is everyone's child. And if there's another Jew who's in need, then that makes a difference for us, and we have to try to respond to alleviate that suffering or fulfill that need. If another Jew is not observing Shabbat, so it's as if, in a certain sense, I'm not observing Shabbat, and I have to feel that lack. We have a responsibility. It's not just for those who are like us and those of our friends. We have to think about the person who's a little bit on the margins, maybe not part of your circle, maybe needs a hello, maybe needs a smile, maybe needs a word of encouragement to invite them in, to help bring them into the community or back together and reconnect, especially now in 2021, back into community. And so the Pesach indeed represents the harmony and unity of Klal Yisrael. It was a lesson that Rabbi Loza ben Azariah learned the hard way when he said, "Achodesh hazeh lachem," and he said, "Acheresh haya libam." The lesson is reinforced through the notion of chabura, of the shared experiences of all 4 types of Jews, of the 12 types of Jews, of the many Jews that we have, and bringing them together around the table. And the Pesach had to be a lamb, had to be a seh, because a lamb is an extremely sensitive animal, says the Medrash. And if one lamb is injured, or one limb of the lamb is injured, the entire lamb feels the pain acutely, says the Medrash. And the Pesach had to be eaten only tzliesh, had to be eaten roasted. Why? Because that preserves its wholeness. Because if you boil it and cook it, and then it could disintegrate into parts, and so it needed to be roasted, that kept it whole. Even a bone could not be broken, because breaking bones symbolizes discord and division. Every individual has a responsibility to become part of and to support the klal. Each person is counted in the Karban Pesach. Each person is counted because every single person counts. Every single person matters. You matter. Hashem loves you, has a relationship with you, and you have to keep that in mind and thinking about others, that the other person matters, and you have to do everything you can to help that other person. And like the Jews in Egypt had to emerge from isolation, we too find ourselves being invited at this time in 2021, Pesach then and Pesach now. We have to also, we're being invited to emerge. Just like the Jews in Egypt were invited to emerge from isolation, so too we in 2021. We are in isolation, not because of the persecution of a brutal country, but because we were devastated by an invisible virus. For a year, we couldn't share experiences normally. We couldn't be there for each other in times of loss or times of happiness to the degree that we were always used to. We couldn't get together with family and friends to share laughs and experience connection. Jewish life, shul life was radically different. And while we try to keep things going virtually, we were constrained. You hopefully stayed connected with one another. I'm feeling that sense of connection, and whenever I speak to people, it's clear that they feel that commitment, they feel that sense of connection. And I'm hoping that you all found silver linings during the course of the year. You had a renewed sense of appreciation of what's important in life. You found creative ways through the shul programs and otherwise to be there for one another. You may have even grown from the solitude in which you discovered your strengths and what's important to you. But like the Jews were invited to emerge from their isolation, we are now invited to emerge from our isolation and return to our shared experiences. Still safely, we're not out of the woods yet, but to return to those shared experiences to the degree that we're able. And through being together with people, we will once again be able to express our freedom in choosing to give of ourselves to create a compassionate, kind, chesed-oriented community. Because freedom is through community, and freedom is through a community of chesed, of kindness. And through the power of kehila, we need to create chaburot, not just with the person next to you, but with the totality of the community. And emerging from this unusual time, people are cautious. People don't know their place. I read an article where they said that up to 50% of people don't know how they're going to adjust to getting back together and socializing normally with others. And people are treading cautiously for multiple reasons. And therefore, we have to emphasize the connections and relationships we have always, but recognize the value and importance of the physically getting together and having those shared experiences to daven, to learn, to have Kiddush, to have Shabbat, where we can really see one another and we can look one another in the eye and we can care for each other. And that's the way we can experience the fullness and the highest level of the community. I heard a story recently from Rabbi Jacob J. Schachter, a teacher of mine. And this is a story about his father, Rabbi Herschel Schachter, Zichrona Livracha. Rabbi Herschel Schachter, not to be confused with the other Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva University, Rabbi Herschel Schachter. But Rabbi Jacob J. Schachter's father, Rabbi Herschel Schachter, Zichrono Livracha, was a chaplain in the U.S. Army who liberated Buchenwald. And he was the one, together with the others, who liberated Yisrael Meir Lau when he was a boy at the age of 8. And after he arrived in Buchenwald, and by the way, just parenthetically, I remember many, many years ago, I was at a RCA convention, and I was listening to Rabbi Schachter, Rabbi J.J. Schachter, Jacob J. Schachter, give a lecture. Suddenly, I have an elbow in my ribs, and I turn to the side, and it's an older man. I say, yes, excuse me, can I help you? And he says, that's my son. So that's when I met Rabbi Herschel Schachter. And after he arrived in Buchenwald, he set up a service. He set up a prayer service. There's an iconic picture that you might have seen of the service in Buchenwald soon after they were liberated, the Jews were liberated. And there were a lot of people who poured into the service, and there were people saying Kaddish. And one person yelled out in Yiddish. He said, to which God are you praying? Are you praying to the God who allowed us to be brought to the crematoria? Why are you even praying? Suddenly a silence, an awkward silence in the barracks where the service was taking place. And Rabbi J.J. Schachter told me that his father, just to stop the service, went over to the person and gave him a big bear hug. And he held on to him until the individual calmed down. And the message that perhaps we could take from the story, to think about the story, is that the person still came and he showed up to David, even though he had many legitimate questions and it was difficult to come. There were many, many Jews who didn't come. Presumably there were many Jews who didn't come to the service. That man came to the service. And even if it was difficult, even if it was hard, he joined the group for the services. But I also think that the story is there to teach us that the hug, Rabbi Schachter, when he hugged him, it was to say, I understand you. Your questions are valid and legitimate. And the hug was to say, in a certain sense, I don't have an answer to the question, but you're part of the community. We're connected to one another. And that's, I think, a very, very powerful message for us, that even if it's difficult, even if it's a very, very challenging times, to figure out a way to stay connected and to reconnect with the group, with the chabura, with the community, with the kehila. When we celebrate the Pesach, to think about this notion of RSVPing and registering and what it means to be free, to appreciate our blessings, but when we have blessings, to think about sharing our bread with others, because that's the highest level of freedom. And we've had losses, and we've had many losses in our community. Most of them were not from COVID, but a loss is a loss. And there's been devastating losses in the world and in our community. And it's been a traumatizing year that we've had to go through. But now is the time where one another, figuratively for now, but maybe literally, is as some people are fully vaccinated and some people just received one vaccine shot. They're partially vaccinated. But as we're getting back together, is to give each other that hug. Figuratively, literally, I'm giving all of you a hug. You should feel that sense of belonging. You play a major role in the community. Each of you is a great Jew who makes this community great and special. And I know all of you to various degrees, and I'm blessed to have your friendship and support and to be able to be part of this community together. And now is the time to come together, to create those chaburot, to connect with the totality of the community, to come together in that shared experience, and for all of us to give each other, figuratively, but perhaps even literally, I'm not sure when we get back to shaking hands with one another, but to give each other that hug. And here's a hug to all of you. We're connected. We're part of Klal Yisrael, and you matter, and we should feel that sense of connection always, and always experience in good health, smachot, together in the years ahead. Chag kosher v'sameach, l'shana haba in Beth Jacob, and l'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. If not in Yerushalayim, at least it should be together in Beth Jacob, together with our family and friends. Chag kosher v'sameach to all of you. Yes, sure, Alice, go ahead. Thank you all so much for joining. Now I can see your chats. Okay, hugs back, hugs back. Okay, good. Yes, yeah, go ahead, Alice. Yeah, go ahead.